I wrote a book back in 2000 on homocysteine, and I described homocysteine as the biggest breakthrough potentially of the century, and got to meet a wonderful man called Professor David Smith, who was the professor of pharmacology at Oxford University. He was the vice dean of the medical school at the time. And it was his group that had found out, in effect, what Alzheimer's was in terms of shrinkage of the medial temporal lobe, the hippocampal region, and then developed a scan, which is now used globally. So I'm sure your listeners know, but basically, if you start to lose your cognitive abilities, it's called mild cognitive impairment. Generally now it's called pre-dementia as well. If it's worse, it's called dementia, but you can only diagnose Alzheimer's, which is 2/3 of dementia, by doing a scan effectively of the medial temporal lobe. These guys developed that. They then found homocysteine was incredibly high in these regions of the brain. And they then did the first ever double-blind controlled trial, giving B vitamins and high dose. I mean, we're talking 500 microgram of B12, 20 milligram B6, that's not so high, 800 microgram of folic acid. And what they got was 53% less shrinkage. Now, the biggest discovery in a way that is just catching on and didn't happen for a few years was they then looked back at the group and they had blood samples from the start, and they looked at the omega-3 status. What they found, which is an incredibly important discovery, is that the third who had the lowest omega-3 and the lowest tertile had no benefit of the B vitamins, but the third in the highest tertile of omega-3 had not 53% less shrinkage, but 73% less shrinkage, which, by the way, takes it down to the level of people who have no cognitive decline at all. They had no further memory loss. And at the end of the 1 year in this group of people, 30% had a clinical dementia rating of 0. In other words, they would not be diagnosed with dementia at all. And to put this in context, the best drug has produced 2% less shrinkage and absolutely no clinical dementia benefit. Now, I said to David Smith at the time, now what? And he said, I hope within 5 years it's standard NHS, National Health Service policy. And I said, what would the policy be? And he said, everyone over 50 needs to be tested on a cognitive function test, which is what they do in memory clinics, because we know this test picks up subtle changes at least 30 years before a diagnosis. Then what? If not good, go to the doctor, get your homocysteine measured. If above 11 micromole per liter, because that's the level where you see accelerated brain shrinkage, supplement the B vitamins, particularly B12. It's largely a malabsorption issue, not a diet issue, but a malabsorption issue. And we know that 3 in 5 people over 60, if tested, are B12 deficient in their blood, but not in their diet. Now, he said it may take 5 years. I said, I'm going to say 10. Now, we're 10 years on and absolutely nothing has changed. So what I did at the time was to get permission from the people who developed the different aspects of the cognitive function test to digitize it and make it freely available to all, which we did around 2015. And we've tested 377,000 people since then. So, you know, wow. We've got real data. And in 2013, when the G8 summit was happening in London and dementia was on the agenda, we managed to get 45 minutes in the G8 summit. What we did was to contact 113 of the world's leading Alzheimer's experts from all the different countries to pummel their health ministers who were attending. And we actually got a discussion. Now, back then in 2013, the statement, which was published in the top Alzheimer's journal, was that at least half of the risk is preventable. We know that less than 1% is caused by genes. People get very confused about ApoE4, and they talk about if you have ApoE4, you've got 20% more risk, but that's a relative risk. The absolute risk is about 4%. And you know that you can modify, there's epigenetics. So ApoE4 doesn't cause Alzheimer's. If you do the right things, you can eliminate that risk, but less than 1% is caused by genes. And here we are. I mean, even back over 7 years ago, NIH, Bedoun did a very nice study of all the studies at the time, and they attributed 22% of the PAR, the population attributable risk, to raised homocysteine, lack of B vitamins, and 22% to omega-3s now, and lack of seafood. Now, of course, you can't combine the two because there's a bit of crossover, but even then, it was pretty clear that at least a third of the risk for Alzheimer's was down to two very simple things, which is B vitamins and omega-3, which is so easy to change.